And there's been quite a lot written about international art English or art speak as it's also known. There's an article here from The Guardian which, if we get the page to load, we can explore. And it describes art speak as pompous, overblown prose, the world of waffle. Um, it talks as well about why this jargon, as they call it, actually came out, became known as International Art English. And it's worthwhile taking the time to look through the article if you want to later on. And it describes the story of two artists who actually really did consider this. Levine and Rule tried to anatomise and map out statements from a particular gallery. There's a particular gallery in New York, and it's possibly no coincidence that the course that is looking at how we can explore the language and understand the language of the arts is also in New York. I don't know what that tells us about New York, but they wanted to map out this idea of international art English. They didn't just want to complain about it. And I think we need to think about the role of the gallery here as well. Now, Alistair Gentry, who also writes for The Guardian, suggests that excessive art jargon seems only to grant power and prestige to a minority of privileged insiders, while trying to withhold access by the rest of us. And I think Perry also implies this. But Rule and Levine actually look at art speak as something that's quite lyrical as well, and something quite interesting. Ordinary words take on alien functions. So they want people to read the Eflux, the gallery they looked at, the press releases from there, not for their content, but for their lyricism and their kind of poetic qualities. And I do want to keep iterating here. Perhaps this isn't the language of the artist, perhaps this is the language of the gallery owner, and I wonder what that tells us about artists who perhaps relinquish power over their work and how it's interpreted when they place the work in a gallery. So have a think about that. But my question here is looking at, is making sense actually overrated? Or does this use of art speak imply a power struggle, as Perry implies, between an elite who understand and masses who do not? So it's a question that we can hopefully consider in our live session. Because I'm going to move on to ideas of the audience. And the question I want to ask here is should art be easy to relate to? And can we take audience reaction for granted, even for those not classed as metroculturals? And there's a big cluster report, a very large research project called the National Visual Arts Cluster Report, and that looked at gallery audiences and profiled them. And metroculturals are people who live in big cities and often visit galleries. But they are also other members of the public who visit galleries. And one quote that I thought was particularly interesting was from a visitor to a gallery who said, "I rarely feel as though I understand what the exhibition is about, but I quite like that." So, as visual artists, my question to you will be, what do you think your audience will look like? And will you consider them when you're putting together your language of the arts? What do you think what kind of language could appeal to them? And what language might be off-putting? So, metroculturals, children, the elderly, somebody who doesn't often visit galleries, somebody who wants to be stimulated, somebody who wants to be comforted. As artists, it might be interesting after this session to actually visit the National Visual Arts Cluster Report and have a look at the sort of different sorts of people who do visit galleries. So having looked very briefly at audience and given you lots of questions, I'm going to move on quickly to look at this other sort of language mentioned in the complex question, the language of academia. And I would argue that there is as many types of academic language as there are artist statements. One factor that is common to academic language is that it cites and it references its sources. It's aimed at a largely academic audience, and one of the things I'd like to put to you is if you're actually wanting to present your work within an academic forum, would not using academic English get between you and your audience? So again, it's more of a complex question than it first appears. So I can imagine there are situations where academic English would seem irrelevant, but also if you're writing for an academic journal, how could you not use academic English? And again, I want to ask another question. Do you think the language of academia, or at least postmodern critical theory, which is one of the things that is kind of often parodied, is it simply another form of art speak? And just to prove that, we're going to have a look at another website which the page here refreshes every time, changes every time it refreshes, the semantic paradigm of context and surrealism, which is an examination of post-capitalist nihilism. Another one that you can go and look at if you want to. Let's refresh the page. Post-cultural narratives in the works of Smith. Dialectic Society, post-semiotic discourse. Superb. Right. So the point I'm making here is that particular forms of academic language are mocked and parodied, as are particular forms of art speak. But perhaps we have to look as well at now, because postmodernist critical theory really is something that belongs to perhaps the area around 1992. Let's look at what artists say about their work now. And this is, so I want to show you some videos. I want to show you a series of 3 videos, very short ones, of artists presenting their work before holding a major exhibition in a large gallery. So these are artist statements presented in a different mode. So as you watch them, what I'd like you to do is consider the possible relationships between their language and the audience. Do you think the language used supports understanding or acts as a barrier?